Lo Sihiye Mishakeila. Based on the verses of Lo Sihiye Mishakeila Vakar Batzecha Misbar Yamacha Amale, there'll be no bereaved or barren woman in your land. I'll fill the number of your days. Amen. Which follows the verse that comes before it. You shall serve Havaya, your God, and he will bless your bread and your water, and I'll remove illness from your midst. In these two verses, we say that within them we have the three basic blessings of life. That when this is all taken care of, everything is kind of secondary to it. The bracha for parnasa, sustenance, life and health, and children. So not just to have, but to have an abundance. Not just to have a long life, but also to have a healthy life. Not just to have children who thrive, etc., live into their old age, and not just to have enough, but to have an abundance. That's just the basics of what the physical blessing is here. And then we say, is the word Lo Sihiye Mishakeila, there will not be a bereaved woman, as in someone who, God forbid, buries her children. Is this a command or is this a promise? Because the language that's used there could go either way. Surprise, it's both. Command that you have to do what you've got to do. You have to serve God. Then he comes through with this promise to fulfill these blessings for you. Then we say, well, what's going on here? Isn't all this kind of predetermined? Is this what the mazel decides? So, okay, your marriage don't necessarily decide it, but the abundance of it can be decided by your actions. Whatever the discussion there is about the physical aspect, that's kind of just clarify, moving on to the next aspect. Now we're looking at more in the physical sense. That we say the language that's used here is vavatem, that you should serve God. Why is he using the language of service? We know we could say love God, it tells us to fear God. Why the language of service? Because service implies that God needs something from us. That's how it works in the physical world, that master hires a servant to do stuff for him. And then everybody gets happy in the fulfillment of what's done. What could God possibly need? If God would need something, then he's not God. So what are we saying here? Does our service actually affect him? Surprise, both! Depends how you ask. So on one level, we say actually your divine service doesn't make a difference to him specifically, it's more for you. That God gave us mitzvahs, l'tzaref, to refine man and creation. Refine us, refine the world around us. That's the ultimate purpose of the mitzvahs. God is not necessarily affected. And then we say actually there's another opinion that says God is affected. And that's what we saw the example of. Moshe goes up and he sees Hashem tying the little crowns to the letters of the Torah. And Hashem says, aren't you going to wish me luck? And then he says, now the power of God should be increased. And then we also saw, you forgot the rock that bore you. When we do what we're supposed to do, then we increase God's strength. And if not, then God forbid we weaken it. So it seems that actually our divine service does affect him in some measure. So what's really going on here? Yes or no, do we actually affect him? It says, depends which level you're talking about. From the level of creative aspect and from the source of the creative aspect, as in what we've learned of the 10 attributes. So where do the 10 attributes come from? This level of Keser, the crown above the head, has two levels to it. Arach Hanatik, Ratzim Tainag, etc. The level of Arach Ampim, which is the source of the emanations, that's not creation yet, but that's where creation is drawing from. From there downward, we do affect him. As we've learned many times before, when we do what we're supposed to be doing, we draw down divine light, divine energy, divine nurture through the whole system of creation to come down to this physical world. On the level above that, not the source of the emanations, but the source of sources at that level and higher, we say we don't necessarily affect him. It's too far removed, we don't have an effect there. So to say, does our divine service make a difference to him, yes or no, we're talking about those levels. What does it mean that our divine service affects him? So we say effects on the level of Kalim and earth, the lights and the vessels. What does this mean? The light is the divine energy, divine nurture, etc. that's going to come down to the world. And that just doesn't come down, it has a containment to it, because that's what it gets channeled through. So if someone does what they're not supposed to do, God forbid they're neglectful, then that vessel that's supposed to hold that divine light gets a defect in it. It's not sustained like that. There could be a deliberate defect, some sort of puncture, etc. that gets caused in the vessel. So the vessel is supposed to hold divine light, it can't anymore. The divine light wants to come down to the world, it wants to come down to nourish the world, etc. And it can't do that because the vessel's broken. This whole level of what's supposed to be interacting with the world, we see that it gets affected. Your divine service does make a difference when it comes to the whole setup. But again, above that setup, as of right now, we're saying that there's no effect. Then we got to, this is what we started last time. When you look at the verses, it's very interesting because in the middle of the verse, it switches the speaker. It starts from a third person, as in some other person is speaking, then it switches to first person. So it says, you should serve the Lord your God, which is third person. And then it says, and I will remove illness from your midst. What's going on here? And then we actually saw it from Ramban that we say, yes, actually the Torah is written in third person. Moshe could have written the way the prophets wrote. The prophets say, God came to me, son of man. The prophets kind of inserted themselves into the narrative. Moshe does not. So you can say, okay, Moshe was recording it, etc. But then where's Moshe hearing it from? Who's speaking in the Torah? Because the Torah is not either written by saying, I said to Moshe. That's what he was told. Moshe would have recorded that also. We don't see that either. So we're saying there's some other entity that's speaking, that's saying that Havaya or Elkim, different aspects of God, is interacting with the world or speaking to Moshe or whatever's going on here. And that's where we bring in the idea that we have the Atzmos Umahus, that we have God's essence speaking here. It's a level that's even higher than a name. Essence is essence. Essence has no name. The highest aspect of God is actually what's giving the Torah over. And that aspect of God, from this third person perspective, could gave over the entire narrative of the Torah. So we're going to speak now about the narrator of the Torah, capital N narrator. We're talking about the essence of God is who's speaking here. Last time I went through Tanya explaining how the name of Havaya is connected to creation. So say the name of Havaya is not actually the highest level of God because it has a connection to creation. And of course, there must be a level of God that's beyond and removed from creation, too high for us to even fathom, to even have a relationship with, so it would seem. So we explained that even though Havaya is infinity and it's above creation, but just saying that Havaya is above creation says there's a relationship to creation. And not just that, we saw already how it creates the structure of the 10 attributes. And then we saw here, remember Yud is like the dot, Chachma, the intellect, and then Hey is a letter that expands and draws down, the same way that that's what intellect does. Once it gets into understanding the expansiveness and the length and breadth of an idea, then Vav Hamshacha, drawing down, that's where you have the attributes come in. And then the Hey again, Malchus, which is this whole spreading out idea again, which is going to go on to create and relay over to the next thing. That's why it's speech. Okay, we have more from Tanya about the name of Havaya. The name Havaya indicates that he transcends time, that he was, is, and will be all at the same instant. Past, present, and future meld into one within the name Havaya, indicating that Havaya transcends time. As is stated in Rabbi Mehemna on Parshas Pinchas, sourcing, and likewise the name Havaya transcends space, for Havaya continuously brings into existence the whole dimension of space, from the uppermost level of space to the lowermost level of space and in the four directions. The name Havaya, as in God's name that we don't fully pronounce, we don't even really fully spell out, there's a Yud in it that we know, there's a Hey, and then there's a Vav, and then there's another Hey. Even when we spell out the letters, we create breaks. We don't even say it in sequence, because this is a holy name of God. Why are we connecting the name Havaya to time and infinity and things like that? Because all those letters are letters of Haya, Hove, and Yihiye. Was, is, and will be. It's the same letters as all the tenses, the time tenses. Haya is an indication of the past, Hove is an indication of present, and Yihiye, will be, is indication of the future. All three of these words have Hey, Yud, or Vav in them. All those letters are in the name of Havaya. So that's where we get the whole idea that it's inclusive but also surpasses all of time and all of space. This is also Tanya. It's also Shar Yechad V'Emunah, which is actually the second section of Tanya. Shar Yechad V'Emunah talks about the creation of the world. How Hashem creates everything through speech. The meaning of the name Havaya is that which brings everything into existence ex nihilo. What is the name Havaya? Again, how are we connecting it to everything? It's this aspect of God that brings everything into existence from nothingness. The last three letters, Hey, Vav, and Hey of this name form the word Hove. Hove, the root of the verb, which means to bring into being. When we indicate it as a present tense, a present existing state of being. The letter Yud, prefix to Hove, modifies the verb, indicating that the action is present and continuous. As Rashi comments on the verse, in this manner was Eov accustomed to do Ya'aseh all the days. So the verse that says from Eov, Kacha Ya'aseh Eov Kol Hayamim. Ya'aseh is an interesting word to have used there, because it could have said Kacha Asa Eov, that so did he do. And yet the word Ya'aseh is, are we going into the future with this? Especially if you know Hebrew grammar, what's going on here. So Rashi explains that kind of word is a continuous. So it's not just something it was, but it's also something that's also ongoing, that always is. So here we're saying that if you look at the name of Havaya and the way that it's spelled out, remember there's a Yud, starts everything, and then you have the other three letters of the Hey, and then there's the Vav, and then there's another Hey. So if you look at the last three letters, Hey, Vav, Hey, that's the same as Hove, present, etc. But now you put a Yud to the beginning of it. That's the first letter of the name. You put the Yud to the beginning of it, it indicates something that's constant. It's not just something that was, or something that is right now, it's something that always is. This name of God, that's all related to all of this. So just as here the prefix of the letter Yud indicates an ongoing process, so too does the initial Yud of the name Havaya indicate that God creates everything ex nihilo continuously. Remember, this we've spoken about many times. It's not the natural state of the world to exist. So it's not just that God created the world, but God keeps bringing the world into existence. This name, the name of Havaya, that's the name that's indicative of this sort of action on God's part. This action is a life force which flows at every single instant into all things created from that which proceeds from the mouth of God. God created everything through speech and his breath and brings them into existence ex nihilo at every moment. For the fact that they were created during the 6 days of creation is not sufficient for their continued existence. As explained above, they must continuously be created. If it's not natural state for the world to exist, then you can't just make it and walk away from it. You have to keep bringing it into existence. So this part of God is what brings it into existence. The sun, remember when we saw the verse that God is a sun and a shield, and it's like God's name of infinity, the name of Havaya is the sun, and Elohim is the shield, and that's indicative of nature. Elohim is the packaging through which God creates the world, so it's referencing back to this verse. We didn't see it here within this specific text, but we have seen it before. The son of Havaya continuously brings creation into being. However, were this illumination to be revealed within created beings, they would be aware of their complete nullification within their source and would not appear created beings. For as explained earlier, when the activating force is perceived, the created being is non-existent. Because God is so infinite, if God didn't contract himself somehow, or give some sort of packaging to himself somehow, then we would not be able to exist as created entities. If you would see God and all the truthness of him, we would just be nothing. Because how could you be a something before the everythingness? You can't. There's not an option there. By definition, quote unquote, God couldn't create us just from his state of being without a whole process of creation. But again, if not, we don't have independent entities. The shield of Elohim is necessary to conceal from created beings the divine illumination of Havaya within them that is responsible for their existence. We need nature, we need a packaging, because you can't handle the truth. We can't handle the truth of existence. So they perceive themselves as existing independently of their life force. Remember we spoke of that also, the whole idea of having an other. That's where the whole thing with the vessels come in, that there's an option now for something that's not called essence to exist. So that doesn't exist without God contracting himself. This perception in turn makes it possible for created beings to consider and feel themselves as tangibly existing. So again, without God doing this contraction to himself, without the turtle shell situation, without the shell, we wouldn't exist the way we do. It wouldn't happen. So that's how we have existence the way it is. And then it refers to a verse. This is from Hosea, prophet Hosea. He'll grant us life for 2 days. On the third day, he will raise us up and we will live before him. Here we're looking at what does it mean that he's going to grant us life for 2 days and on the third day. So what are the days that are going on here? Looking at it from this more esoteric Chassidic kind of aspect, the 2 days are referring to the 2 different levels of Ishtalshalos, the 2 different levels of the chain of creation. What are the 2 levels that we have? We have Mamali Kol Omen, that we call fills all worlds, and then we have Soviv Kol Omen, which surrounds all world. We saw this at the end of the Tshuva Maamar. Remember we said that this is a world in flux. It's the world without the definition. That's how we could change. That's how you could do full Tshuva. Here, when we talk about the 2 levels of Ishtalshalos, Mamali Kol Omen, that's the measure of godliness that we could experience, that we have a sense of it. So the fact that I know that I'm alive and I can feel life, that is Mamali Kol Omen. Personalized life force to each entity. Soviv Kol Omen, though we say it surrounds, we don't mean in a spatial sense. We mean it just in a sense that we can't individually take it in. It's too much muchness. It's like the sun shining on things. You don't take an individual sunbeams into yourself. Mamali Kol Omen fills our world. That's adapting to various levels of existence and resulting in different levels of light, revelations as per the vessels, but never total concealment. So the fact that we package it also means that we could somehow experience it in some measure. We have to be able to take it in somehow. So we do that by packaging it. The example of that, we have the soul in the body. There's a soul that goes into your body and you could feel this life in you. That fills our world. Soviv Kol Omen surrounds our worlds. This is an ormakav, so means an encompassing light. It's a light too powerful to be condensed into a framework, structure, or vessel, which may or may not be concealed. Example, sunlight and a room. The room does not retain the light. If the sun goes away, then the room just reverts back to the way it is. Versus the soul in the body, the soul fills the body with light and life. So we see there's kind of a difference there. We don't mean it spatially, but we mean it kind of like the way that we can interact with it. Can we detect it? Can we discern it or not? It's kind of different between these 2 levels. It also, when we say 2 levels of Ishtalshalos, 2 levels of creation, Mala and Soviv, you could also say, oh, there's 2 levels. It's kind of like the light and the vessels, the earth and the kalim that we saw. Either it's above Tzimtzum, light as it exists for himself, and light revealed to others. You could say it's also the way he can experience his own light versus the light that we can experience. So there's different ways of translating it, but we recognize that there's some connection to creation in the way that we say, what are these 2 days? What are the 2 levels that it's referring to? Now the third day, however, he will raise us up and we will live before him. This third day is reference of the essence of our Ein Sof, transcending all revelation. So this is a much higher level. It's essence level. Now we're slowly starting to bring in how essence is going to come into all of this. Tanya. This is talking about how God kind of exists within the world. Tanya in the 40s. Contemplating the greatness of the blessed Ein Sof. Ein Sof means light without end. Very much high level. The thinking person will come to the realization that as his name indicates, so is he. There is no end or limit or finitude at all to the light and vitality that diffuse from his simple will. Simple in that it has no cause, nor is it subject to limitations inherent in mortal will, which is united with his essence and being in perfect unity. By the way, you see, we call it the light without end, but we don't call it the light with no beginning because we know where it comes from. It comes from God's essence. Ein Sof is a light without end, as in we say it's infinite. We don't really have a better description of it. It's just the never-ending light. The light and vitality that emanate from God to create and animate finite worlds are in no way similar to light and vitality that are found within created beings. Light that emanates from a created being is not limited by the capacity of the recipient. On the other hand, the luminary has no control over its power of illumination. Having been created as a luminary, it has no choice but to illuminate. Divine light possesses all the positive qualities of illumination found in created luminaries, but none of its deficiencies. Light emanates from the luminary only when the luminary desires it. When we talk about God's light shining down into the world, that light, it has a will, it has a decision to it. The light sources that we recognize in the world aren't like that. The sun must shine. The sun doesn't get to choose its level of shiningness. It must. Here it has a higher UV index. Here it has a lower UV index. Whatever. That's not the sun moderating itself. The sun was created to be a luminary, and the sun thereby just shines. It's actually funny. I was talking to my cousin. We have a lot of back and forth with science and universe stuff because he's very into it. So whenever I find stuff, so we're actually talking about that when you look at Torah, it doesn't actually refer to the sun as a star. It always refers to the sun as a shemesh. Shemesh, Yereach, and then the kochavim. It always separates sun from stars. It's a very interesting, what does that mean? Because we're always, the sun is the biggest star, blah, blah, blah. Torah actually, as far as I know, never refers to the sun as a star. Solar system science, it's not even solar system, whatever, it's geosystem science. It's so interesting because we teach everything and we're so sure about everything, but we haven't really gotten that far. There should always be the asterisk, as far as we know, to the best of our knowledge. You should be more humble. Einstein believed in God, you can believe in God. Okay, the will of created beings, though it chooses freely, it is by its very nature limited and restrictive. So you have the luminary, physical luminaries must shine, and then we have will. When we have a will, even though we could choose stuff according to what we want, etc., but because we're limited, our will is also limited. God's will, by contrast, while maintaining the positive attributes of mortal will, as in there's choice to it, is encumbered by none of its limitations. There's no limit to God's will. His will to illuminate, for example, is unbounded, just as he himself is without limitation. Being infinite, God's light cannot give rise to created and finite beings unless it first undergoes the series of self-limiting, self-concealing contractions known as tzimtzumim. We've spoken about tzimtzum a lot before, and we've spoken about the idea that you have this kind of both levels, dynamic of existence, of spreadingness, givingness, greatness, muchness, what we call chesed, chesed, it's expansiveness, and gvura, which is actually containment. Gvura, which is might, is not strength the way that we understand it, just in physical strength, but it's the ability to contain something. The sicha that we did about Avram and Yitzchak. So one is a potential, it's like damming a mighty river. You have a river that has so much power to it, but unless you put a dam there, you can't actually channel that energy. You have an ox like a plow field, but you got to put a yoke on it. You don't channel its strength. So there's a whole dynamic of wanting to expansiveness and giveness versus the holding back of it. The might of the rains. God makes it rain. He can make it rain, but we can't handle that level of rain. So he has to pull back. When we say that God is Ein Sof, without limit, Tanya's telling us exactly what you think it is what it is. There are no limitations to it. So we talk about divine light. The way we recognize light, you have a sun, and the sun must shine. God shines, but he doesn't must shine, but he shines. As in God's light comes down to the world. They say that we have a will, we could want stuff, and through that we could choose, etc. Yes, God has a will also, but we finite, limited, created beings. Our choices are kind of within a framework, and God just doesn't have that framework. So God could choose, God could shine light. Saying otherwise would be a limitation. God Ein Sof, there is no limit. Because God has no limit, if he would just create us in that kind of state of being, then we wouldn't be able to exist as separate entities. So instead, God had to kind of contract himself, suck in the gut, quote unquote, put himself aside, even though the result is like, it's not really literal when we say that God put himself aside, because there is no place in the world where he is not. God is just everything and everywhere. When we talk about God contracting himself, it means that he made himself less visible. Not that he's not there, but he's less visible to us. So that way we can have it. Now, it's a massive contraction. The light that exists in the world that creates this world is so incredibly dim compared to what God's awesome light is. So it's a little bit of a hard thing to fathom because the entire universe is such a wonder to us. Had the worlds descended from the light of the blessed Ein Sof without contractions, so we didn't have this whole idea of tzimtzum, but according to a gradual descent from grade to grade, by means of cause and effect, that's called il v'al, one thing leads to another, so kind of like a domino effect almost. The loftier level being the direct cause for the manifestation of the level immediately following it, so if one thing would just follow from another, we wouldn't be able to exist like this. We can't have a world like this. We need to have this idea of the contraction. As is the case with thought and speech, thought is the cause, speech is the effect. Though thought is more spiritual than speech, the two levels stand in a certain proportion to each other in that, for example, both are composed of letters that form words. You ever see those memes? Fun fact, you can't read this without the voice in your head. When a person has a thought, that means that you took an idea and you've given it words and shapes to it. But if you go to the level of a will and a desire, there's not words there because it's higher than a word. You don't crave in a language. Cravings and stuff, there's a universal aspect to them because there's not a language to it. It's only when you start thinking in your own intellect that you actually start giving a language and a limitation and a containment to the thought or to the wisdom, whatever you're cogitating on. And so with every cause and effect relationship, the effect must partake of the characteristics of its cause. It'd be impossible for cause to bring into existence an effect which is infinitely removed from it. So the whole idea of cause and effect is that even if what is at the end of it doesn't look like the beginning, but you can still trace it back. If you have a wooden chair, I can somehow figure out what tree it came from, even though it doesn't look like a tree trunk anymore. Since the light of mentality, the creative power that emanates from God is infinite, while created beings are finite, they cannot possibly have come into being in a manner of cause and effect. So that's why the whole idea going back to God contracting himself, because if infinite creates infinite, then you just have more infinite. How do you get from the infinite to the finite? So we have this whole idea of the contraction. For if this were the case, this world and all it contains would not have been created in its present form in a finite and limited order. From the earth to the firmament is a distance of 500 years. I'm not exactly sure what that is. 500 years journey being a finite dimension. The point of it is that if I could give it a time frame, if I could say it is this many, then it's automatically not infinite. So that's one of the things I said to my cousin, that people say like, oh, time is infinite. Time is not infinite because the fact that I can put a number to it means that it's not. Not just the fact that I can put a number to it. The fact that when I add a number, it changes the time means that it's not infinite. Because the whole idea of infinity means that no matter what I do to it, it actually doesn't change. By definition, you can't subtract. By definition, you can't add. If I say time is infinite, oh yeah, what year is it? And I give you a year. Well, it's 5 days from now, it's a year from now, another year. Because if you just change the number by adding to it, no matter how many finite numbers you put together, you will never get infinite. You cannot get infinite from finite. No matter how big the numbers are, you just cannot. Even space, if I can measure space, that automatically means it's not infinite. I can give it a number. Versus, again, something that's infinite is not affected by any of the numbers. The more you think about it, the more you're like, wow, our whole perception of the universe is off. And similarly limited is the distance between one firmament and the next, and so also the radial extent of each firmament is a distance of 500 years. Again, just focus on the fact that we're saying that there's a number to this, and all above applies to this world. Even the world to come and the higher level of Gan Eden, the abode of the souls of the great tzaddikim and the souls themselves, and needless to add, the angels are all in the realm of bounds and limitation. For there is a limit to their apprehension of the light of the blessed Ein Sof, which shines upon them through being clothed in Chabad and so on. So even Garden of Eden, all these spiritual realms and all the spiritual dimensions, they are still created entities. They're higher than us, they have more revelation than us, but it's still a created entity. They still don't experience God in its true essence-ness. Souls and angels inhabiting these worlds comprehend godliness as a result of its vestiture in the Chabad of those worlds, through the containment, you actually could have experience. Though lofty, their comprehension is nonetheless limited. An angel can't have God in all of his glory. Remember, then it would just disintegrate, it'd be nothing. We saw a little bit of that in Mechamocha. Can't. Even an angel has to have some form of containment. Even an angel is a created entity. By definition, a created entity is a finite entity. Hence, there is also a limit to the enjoyment that they derive from the rays of the Shekhinah and to their pleasure in the light of God, for they're incapable of deriving enjoyment and delight of an infinite order without being nullified out of their existence and returning to their source. Thus, even the creatures of the highest spiritual worlds are finite beings. So for them to be created in a finite manner, the process of contraction must be invoked. Being finite, they are totally dissimilar to their source, the infinite godly light that exists prior to contraction. Basically, we're going through the idea of the fact that the levels of existence within the world, ultimately, it all comes to some sort of finite limitation. Just a sidebar, we're talking about here about that the souls themselves and the angels can only experience a measure of godliness. It's a very interesting idea that the souls and the angels, they could experience godliness and appreciate godliness in a way that we can't, being higher spiritual entities. On the other hand, when we do a mitzvah here, we could actually unite with God's essence. However, we don't understand what we're experiencing, which is part of the reason why we could experience it. Because if we knew what we're experiencing, we would just nullify ourselves. So it's a little bit of an interesting dynamic here. We unite with God in a much higher way than angels and souls can, but on the other hand, they could experience God in a way that we can't. But by definition, experience of God means that they've had a packaging, a containment of it. Here, the Torah mitzvah sets God's will, and God's will is one with himself.